Welcome to our second episode of Community Reimagined. The purpose of this show is to dig a little deeper into some of the issues facing our community, some of the challenges and problems that we are working together to address, and really to highlight the change makers and the people who are on the ground making a difference for our neighbors and our community. Today, we have a really amazing opportunity to talk about strong and stable families and what it means to be not just financially literate, but to have pathways towards empowerment, pathways towards self-sufficiency and stability. And so it's really fitting that we have one of our fantastic United Way volunteers, advisory board members, and community member with us today to talk about this really important topic. Sam Jones, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Appreciate it.
You know, Sam, for those of you who are not aware, is the Market President of BancorpSouth Bank right here in Chattanooga. And you also have a lot of community involvement. You've been a part of the UTC Alumni Board and Junior Achievement, Community Development, Financial Institutions of Chattanooga, and of course, United Way. So welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. Tell us a little bit about you, Sam, and a little bit about what caused you to want to get engaged with the United Way.
Well, I've been a banker all my adult life. I came right out of college and went to UTC and graduated from UTC and went right to work for a bank here in town. And so I've been in banking in Chattanooga all my life. And when you're in the financial services industry, what goes on in your city is the main component of your success of your bank.
That's right.
So it's always, bankers have always been at the forefront of volunteering for all kinds of civic activities where, we do this, we're in the civic clubs, we're in the service clubs, not just because we kind of feel like we need to be, but because we want to be, and our business success also depends on how good the Chattanooga community does.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's, it's kind of bred in us, and I've enjoyed doing that, and really and truly sometimes working with the volunteer side can actually be sometimes more challenging than the normal job, but it actually is the paybacks are even higher. So I've always felt like, to those that are much is given than much is expected, and we should all be good stewards of that.
That's amazing. You were saying just now, walking into the United Way, that your history with us goes way back.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Oh,
in your early banking days?
I'm thinking the first time I actually volunteered as a fundraiser was probably in 1985.
Wow. Where
I was a fundraiser when I was working with Mr. Gary, with John Gary, and Mr. Gary was chairman, and he really kind of introduced me to the United Way, and it's fitting he's been involved obviously very much ever since, and so that's where I kind of got involved.
That's right. Yeah, we've been doing this work together for decades.
Yeah,
for decades. So thank you for that.
Me, probably a few more decades than you.
maybe just a few. But that just speaks to the longevity of United Way's work in the community. And, what we have found to be true is that what has never changed about United Way is we bring people together to solve community problems. Right. What has changed, I think, is we're facing, as a community, some challenges today that they may not be new, but they're certainly, I think, escalating, and we're paying attention to them more now more than ever. And I want to dig into that with you a little bit.
Okay.
You and I were together a few weeks ago, and we hosted one of the senior leaders at the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. And he made a statement that I thought was really almost shocking. He said that Tennessee is one of the least resilient states in the country and one of the least economically mobile states in the country. And I think what that means, like you dig down into that, right? And what we know in Hamilton County right now is we've got 4,000 babies being born this year. 2,200 of them, over half, are born into financial insecurity. Over half, right?
Yes.
And the issue is how many, the projections are that 70% stay stuck in that cycle of financial insecurity. So, as a banker, being on the forefront, tell us a little bit about How do we start to help people be more financially literate? What does that mean? How do we help people build wealth?
Well, and I think it helps to kind of think about what it is to be financially literate. Literate's kind of one of those words that sometimes has a negative connotation, but what it really just means is that it's somebody that's got the necessary skills and the knowledge to make good financial decisions.
Yeah.
So it's not, it is something that is fairly basic, but if it's just like reading, if you don't get a foundation on learning to read or a foundation on doing your math or your physics or whatever you're learning in school, then building on it is almost impossible. So a lot of the when we talk about the gaps, especially you talk about in financial literacy, the millennials and the folks that are coming out just now out of high school
Yeah.
are actually doing a little bit better than their parents. The good news is that the schools are starting to impress financial knowledge more in the schools.
Gotcha.
Not only in their curriculum, which is sometimes a part of the curriculum, but they are also accepting outreach from many different places. United Way, we go into schools and teach children to save. We teach classes on the knowledge of credit. We even talk about the possibility of home ownership, in the high schools. So there is more getting done. That wasn't being done 15 years ago.
Mm-mm.
And in fact, I remember when I was in school, we didn't talk about that at all.
No.
If you learned anything that you learned about money, you just learned about from getting your allowance from your parents or something like that. And so then you got a job and you worked and you figured it out on your own, maybe.
Remember your first paycheck, right?
Right.
Wait, where'd all the money go?
Yeah, that seemed like so much.
Yeah.
But so that the good news is it's a little better. That gap there, though, of those folks that are maybe, and this is not everyone, but it's a good part of the population that may be 25 to 40 years old, have not really had a lot of credit training and in their life.
Right.
So that's kind of the challenge. That's a little harder. That's a little harder for all of us because how do you reach that age people? You got a captive audience in the schools.
Mm-hmm.
They
That's
love
true.
it when you come in and talk about something different than what they've been used to talking about during the day.
That's
They're
right.
they're usually very engaged. The students are. But how you do it is that you do it through different community outreaches where you have folks come on and put on seminars. I guarantee you there are banks and mortgage companies and realtors that would love to come and talk to people about
Right.
home ownership
Mm-hmm.
because that's how they make their money.
That's right.
So the more houses they sell, the more money they make, and they want people to be home buyers. And there's a myriad of first-time home buyer programs. Problem is, not very many people know about them.
That's right.
So we have to get that word out. And how we do that is through these kind of programs that we're doing today, through some outreach where we have to go and invite these folks. We can do it at the churches. We can do it at the community centers. We can do it at a lot of different places.
What about in people's businesses? It just seems like a logical place to partner with human resources or different companies in town
Absolutely.
to ensure people know how to build their wealth and be, they say most families are $400 away, from a huge financial crisis. And I think our businesses have a real heart for that, right? To be sure their employees are stable.
Well, they do, and a happy worker and a worker that's not worried about his financial situation is a more productive worker.
No doubt.
No doubt about that. And I think that's a very good point. And I think that whenever we used to do a program, and we're getting ready to start it up before the COVID thing hit, where we go into businesses and maybe take them lunch or take them dinner on second shift, and talk to them about a checking account and get them to open a checking account and that sort of thing. Well, and the businesses are always very open to that. Everybody likes free food, so if they, you do that, and we always had real good attendance to those kind of things. So I think that's a great idea, and that's something we can work through with some local businesses. But we have to make the outreach. They're not going to come to us, and so we've got to do that.
So the opportunities for families and households exist. The key is finding pathways, right, to connect people to the resources that are here.
It really is. There are so many good programs, not just in buying a home. There's very many products out there, especially for first-time home buyers. There's down payment assistance. There's forgivable down payment assistance. There is all kinds of different things, and there are these programs that can help these people learn. The thing about it is, there's a base. Going from having no knowledge about financial to buying a house is a big jump.
It's a big jump.
And I think that's one of the reasons why that many people don't feel like that I can just never do that.
That's right.
I can never own a house. My parents never owned a house. I can't own a house. Why do I think I can do it? Well, you can.
You can. And so often we know what we see, right? And our vision typically extends to the world around us. Right. And something amazing happened this past year in our community in terms of home ownership. On the ground work, exactly what you're talking about. We had a neighborhood leader of the Avondale Neighborhood Association, and 8 out of 11 neighborhood associations came together, and they all said, if we could shift from renting to owning our own homes, that the quality of our neighborhoods would rise dramatically, right? Okay. So then they said, okay, well, what are we going to do about it? What are the barriers that are keeping us from actually going from renting to owning our own homes? And I'll tell you how the story ended in a minute, but talk about that a little bit. What are those barriers to go from that jump of, I have a desire, to actually making it a reality?
Well, there's several ways, and I think it's just kind of one of these things like how do you eat an elephant?
Right.
You eat it one bite at a time.
Yeah.
And so that's what you kind of got to do. You've got to figure out the base, kind of what I call basics of your financials. You've got to look at your income. You got to look at what expenses that you've got. And I'm not talking about that, like your car payment necessarily or your rent payment right now. I'm talking about what else, what are your fixed overhead expenses? And then let's look at your debt. And all that, well, what that basically means is a budget.
Yeah.
Well, a budget kind of sounds to a lot of people like, I'm not going to do a budget. That's for companies and people like that. No, it's not. Everybody needs, and you're budgeting, most people are budgeting even if they're only doing it in their head.
Right.
But the problem is if you do it in your head, it's hard to keep up with. It's kind of old school, but sometimes you got to sit down and you got to write it down. And you've got to see what you got coming in, what you could afford to do. And you've got, what that will give you is, it will give you the differences between needs and wants.
Yeah.
And needs are needs. You got 2 or 3 kids to take care of. You got food. You got
eat. You got to keep the lights on.
You got that. That's a need. That's a given. You got to do that. The wants is what gets us in trouble.
Right.
And it's the American dream. Everybody wants more and doesn't want to wait for anything anymore. And what do? We go in debt. And maybe we go into debt too quickly, or maybe we go into debt that's not healthy debt.
Sure.
There's good debt and there's bad debt. 24% interest on a credit card is pretty tough.
Very tough.
It's a cycle that if you get into it is very difficult to break. It's not unlike a paycheck borrowing company.
Payday lending and
When if you once you kind of get into advance on a paycheck, it's hard to get out
It's hard
of
to get out of it.
because the fees are very expensive and it's just very difficult to get out of it. So you have to kind of, on your wants, you have to decide, well, do I really have to have that? Do I need that? Or what, do I have a goal that I want to get to before I do that want?
Mm-hmm.
And that goal might be something that you talked about a couple of minutes ago. I call this really more of a need, but it is kind of a want to a lot of people, and that's just an emergency fund.
Oh, yeah.
I just can't stress how important having an emergency fund is. That is so many times what causes the difference between people that fall off that financial cliff
Right.
and the ones that manage to stay on top. And surprisingly, you can read, and different people have varying amounts of what you should keep. And if somebody comes to me and tells me I need to keep 18 months of my salary, I'm going to say, well, so good luck.
Yeah.
But you might need to have more than 2 weeks.
That's right.
You need a few weeks. You need if you can, have 3 months. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but if you make that one of your goals, then when you have that car that breaks down, or that something that happens to one of the kids, or something
Medical
happens
bill,
like that, anything like that that's just out of the ordinary, where you're doing okay as long as you don't have the bump. This helps you with the bump.
That's right. And we're all going to have bumps, right? You just said something I think really, just really interesting. You're right. It is simple. Write it down. Determine needs and wants. It requires discipline. But as you were talking, it also made me think it requires some hope. Mm-hmm. To have financial goals, to be thinking about home ownership, and to move, to work, to move your family, which so many of our neighbors are working hard, sometimes 2 and 3 jobs, right? Mm-hmm. And just barely making ends meet. There has to be a hope that's achievable. So can you just share a story, sometime in your career, or maybe even in your volunteering life, that or even just personally, maybe for you, Sam, that you've seen people move ahead financially, even in small goals, because they have hope that there's a future and that they can actually achieve it, not a false hope, but something that there's actually, steps to get there. And tell us more about that.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind was in the first time I ever worked on a Habitat for Humanity house, and saw a lady that was a single mom and her 2 kids move into their own house. This lady, she didn't think she had a prayer of ever owning her own home, but she was very determined. She was a positive person, and you talk about hope and positivity, and she just said, by golly, I'm going to find out a way. And she did. And I tell you what it does. When you do something like this, when you make that first little bit of success, when you maybe scrimp and save, and all of a sudden you got an extra $1,000 sitting in the bank, that's important.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel better.
Good.
And it makes you feel a little bit more secure. And you think, well, if I can get 1,000, I wonder if I can get 2. And so when you do get the 2,000, then you're right. It's all about, I can do this. I've proved that I can do this. Let's go for the next.
Yeah.
And so and like I said, this lady, man, she was just, the tears and everything else when Habitat Humanity is great anyway. But when they moved to that house is just terrific, because she had lived in subsidized housing all her life, and I'm pretty sure that her parents had lived most of their life, and so that was just really something.
You gave me chills when you were telling that story, because I think we all have a drive in us for that, right? That there's a sense of hope and achievement and wanting that stability, especially for your family. And it reminded me of a story. This was just a couple of weeks ago. Here we stand in this COVID crisis. And in a minute, I want to talk a little bit about that impact, financially on neighbors and practical things that we can do. But right here in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, yes, we are here, and the community's here to give help when people need it. Pay that mortgage, pay that light bill or the utility bill. But we don't want people stuck on, a cycle of giving and charity, right? We want to empower people to move beyond that crisis or that bump in the road that we're all going to face at some time. And we had an email come to us recently about a woman who had called to our 211 line. We connected her for the emergency food box service that we do with the food bank.
Right.
She was almost homeless to the point where when the food box was delivered, I think we met her at a Mr. Zip in the parking lot to give her that food. 3 months later, she called. And when her person went to meet her with that food box, she took her down the street to the address of the home that she was now living in and renting at the moment, but working towards owning it. And just the pride, right, that she had over making the step from homeless to actually turning a key in her own home. It's huge. And right now, COVID-19 has just caused a lot of people to feel pretty hopeless in their just financial situations. What advice do you have for them?
Well, I tell you what, this is just, everybody has to understand, and this is just unprecedented.
Yeah.
I'm just,
right.
I've lived through some very interesting times and some business cycles that have been extremely trying.
Right.
But I've never seen anything quite like this. And we have to realize that this is like your sign out front says, this too shall pass.
Right.
Now, that's tough. And the longer that it goes, the harder that is sometimes to, keep that in your mind. But right now, you may just have to know that you got to hold on. But know that that's okay. And it's not, it may not be what your plan is. It may say, well, I've got laid off from my job and I'm only being able to work 25 hours and I can't make the kind of money I was making. I'm holding on, I'm making it, but when is this ever going to end? Well, it is going to end. And we're lucky where we live. Our city is, I think, we've got as good a future as anybody else. It has got a future. We've got some stability. We've got a lot of good things going for us. If we can just hold on, keep your head above water, there's an end to this. Don't think that it's forever, because it's not.
Right.
And it threw everybody a curve.
That's right.
There's almost nobody has gone unaffected. So unfortunately, it has affected, as many times any kind of economic downturn, the lower end of the scale, of the income scale, and that sort of people.
Low-wage jobs.
The wage jobs get affected quicker. That's tough. But man, I just say, you got to keep the faith and you just got to hold on during the really tough times, because it's going to get better. And
the beauty of Chattanooga that you just mentioned is that we are a strong community, and in these moments where so many people are hurting, man, we see such generosity.
There's no doubt.
It's amazing. We, United Way launched the Restore Hope Fund back in March when we wanted just a bridge, a financial bridge for families who'd lost work due to COVID, to pay that light bill, to pay that rent, to pay that mortgage, keep people in their homes. And honestly, I thought we'd be shutting that fund down at the end of May. We'd help as many families as we could, and then we'd be transitioning out of this crisis. Well, clearly the crisis continues.
Right.
And as we're, coming to this year end, my goodness, the community has contributed close to $900,000 into that fund. And we've got partners on the ground that are working with families. And so when people need help, we want them to remember they can reach out, right? They can call 211 at United Way. They can connect to the Restore Hope Fund. They can work with this fabric of community partners, including our banking institutions, to find the next path forward while they're holding on.
Yeah, and I will tell you that I've seen it time and time again that not only are people generous with their dollars in this city, but we'll work with people.
Yeah.
You talk about you talk to your utilities, you talk with the banks. I can promise you that if you're up front, if you go into your bank and you're having trouble with any kind of payments that you might be making on a car or anything else like that, right now, unprecedented what we will do to try to, because the last thing we want to do is to pick up somebody's car or to foreclose. We're not going to foreclose right now anyway, but it's just, I've seen it, and I see it in all businesses. People are giving, landlords are giving, free rent to small businesses. They're cutting, they're saying, look, pay me what you can pay me. It's probably going on everywhere to an extent, but I don't think it's any better or any stronger than it is in our community, because I have never seen a community the size for our size that is more generous than Chattanooga is.
Yeah.
So what you said was something that kind of struck me. What we're having right now is, we always have people in need, but right now we've got people in need that have not been in need before.
That's right.
And
don't always know where to turn.
They don't know where to
That's
turn,
right.
and they're maybe just a little proud. I'm not going to go to the food bank. Well, let me tell you, you go to the food bank if you're hungry. That's what it's there for.
That's right.
And that this type of a horrible pandemic is why we have the infrastructure that we've built, and that luckily we've had good times that we've built and done and had them in our community to take care of this. So while we always want to think about breaking the cycle of poverty and breaking the cycle of financial literacy, or whatever you want to talk about,
Sure.
let's don't de-emphasize the problem that is what the very reason these things are really there are for you guys that have never needed it before but don't know where to turn, and now you need a place.
You're right. And something that I've loved the most about my time with United Way has been this recognition that this isn't about people who have giving to those who have not.
Right.
That is not the model of United Way. We recognize that, connected community changes everything, and that those relationships are at the core. And there will be a time when all of us need each other. Right? There's a time when we can all be givers, and there's a time when we all need help. And this is one of those moments where we can just see that come together in a really, really, really powerful way.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
Yeah,
So.
that's good. So back to this home ownership question and story. So I mentioned the neighborhood leadership, and they looked around. They came to United Way for data and said, what's happening? Why do none of our neighbors own their homes? So Dr. Eileen, the brilliant data statistician that we have on staff here, dug a little deeper, and she found that in Hamilton County that only 3% of conventional home loans went to Black families. 97% to white families. What's that about? And more importantly, because these neighborhood residents started financial literacy training with their neighbors, and are creating new pathways for folks to own their homes, and it's working. So why is that, do you think? And then what are things people can do to change that? Because we know owning your home is one of the best things you can do for the wealth of your own family and the generations to come.
Yeah, I think that statistic is a tough one, and we we find that, I'm indirectly involved with the mortgage side of the bank, but applications that come from especially the Black community and sometimes Hispanic community are the number are small.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's the actual approval rate
Mm-hmm.
and the turn down rate is really not so out of line.
Sure.
But what's out of line is the number of applications that we get. Well, there's no doubt that some time back that there was, there may have been forces at work that you could argue that purposely kept those
Redlining.
applications down.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Redlining. Got it.
And that, to me, I don't think really is the case anymore. In fact, we find ourselves having to do outreach and do community outreach. We only have one office in Chattanooga. We happen to be downtown. We go to several different places in not just the downtown, but different areas of town to try to get more applications. And that's one way to do it. But there again, you've got to have the desire from the applicants. You've got to have people
Yeah.
want that desire and see that they can do it.
And something we saw that seems to be working really well in that area of outreach. Because you're right, I think that the Avondale neighborhood president said the issue is we aren't our neighbors aren't applying for these
Right.
loans.
Right.
So why not? And so the financial literacy that was happening then neighbor to neighbor and being trained through 9-week cohorts of home ownership classes
Right.
was helping break down the barriers of knowledge,
Exactly.
giving a foundation of education around to understand, which is a pretty heavy topic, financial literacy. I sit in on a few of the classes and wish that someone had taught me this, right?
Yeah.
But they were learning this foundation, and then the fear of taking those steps moving forward to pursue a home loan, they weren't scary anymore.
Right.
And so what a wonderful thing. And I think the key there was trust.
Yeah.
They trusted Kinsmith and they trusted their neighbors.
Right.
So, yeah, that's the case with everything, I guess, in life. But
Well, and the fear, and you mentioned that, like you say, it's kind of the fear of the unknown.
you're right. Yes.
And if you don't know, you kind of have to know what you don't know.
Right.
And a lot of people, it's really tough when you don't know what you don't know. So things that you find in the first steps in this literacy side, or things that we can help with, a lot of your financial people, your banks, your other resources can talk to you about, this is a step. Maybe you're worried, you're saying, well, I'm not going to be able to get a house because my credit score is low.
Right.
Okay. Well, then let's look at why it's low.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things that go into a credit score. Most people don't really have a good feel for that.
Sure.
And only, and you say, well, I pay my bills, but my credit score is still low. Well, that is a big piece of it, and it is the biggest piece. It's like 35%.
Right.
But,
There's more.
another 30% is like, how much credit card debt do you have?
Mm-hmm.
What's your availability? If you have a Visa card with a $5,000 limit and you owe $4,900, then that's going to hurt your credit score.
Yeah.
If you only owe $2,000 on that, then that's going to help your credit score. Other thing is, do you apply for every credit card, department store credit card, everything else that everybody asks you to?
Right.
Well, then you get dinged for having too many inquiries.
That's right.
You
That's
know?
right. Well,
So-
you come to my house and make sure my kids know this when they're getting a little older.
Yeah, because that's part of the sales job that people say,
Of
if you'll
course.
open an account today, you can get 20%
Yes, you can save
off.
20%.
Well, the reason they do that is because they make money.
Right,
So,
right,
so there's a lot of things. So if once you have that knowledge
Yeah.
of what makes up that credit score, then you can see that you could do something about that. And you almost always can. And there's things. First of all, you got to pay your bills. If you don't pay your bills on time, then you going to have a problem. But if you pay your bills and you're doing what you're supposed to do, and you still have a credit card or a credit score that's low, you've got real room for improvement.
Right.
Once you get your credit score in the acceptable range, I promise you that there are programs and ways that you can take that next step.
And the message is that our banks want to help, right?
Absolutely.
Want to help people get there, want to help improve credit scores and budget and understand how people can move towards not just income, not just what people make in their jobs, but assets.
Yeah.
Having assets, which makes a big difference in the long haul.
And I'll tell you, the mortgage companies and the banks, we now have individual loan officers. Virtually every bank does, and probably most every mortgage company, that have people that's really their primary job. Most mortgage lenders are paid on commission about how much they produce, but almost all of us have one person that's their dedicated job. They make loans, but they get a salary instead of a commission, and they are the people that can spend the time and will spend the time helping you understand what you're doing wrong, maybe what you can do to improve. Come back, let's work this. And I've seen it numerous times where it's been 2 years after we first talked to somebody about a mortgage loan before they could actually get one. It can't be done overnight. Sometimes it can be done very quickly, but a lot of times it takes time. But anything that's worth as much as owning your own home can take some time. So I guarantee you that if you're willing, there is somebody there that will help you walk you toward that ownership.
That's
And
great.
Don't be shy. I promise you, there are incentives, good and bad incentives for banks to make as many home loans and new first-time home buyers as we can. So some of the banks needed to be forced, so therefore there's regulations. Some of the other banks were doing it anyway, but now they're just getting a little bit more rewarded for it. But I promise you that it's there.
And that's good for all of our community because
Absolutely.
we just, when families are paying more to rent the space where they are versus paying a mortgage of something that you own, it makes a big difference.
Homeownership is just it's still the American dream.
It is.
And it's for the vast majority of us, it will be our biggest asset, and it will be our biggest part of our worth, and hopefully something that you might actually be able to leave to your kids.
That's right.
So
That's great. Well, I've got one more question for you.
sure.
And this may sound a little silly, but I'm just curious. I was really encouraged by what you said, that our youngest generation and our millennials are understanding how to manage money. That's great news, because I can tell you that I didn't learn any of that until I was in college and living on my own and trying to figure all that out. But think back to your childhood, because this really does start, I know, with our children. What was your first education moment when it came to financial literacy?
Wow. I think, I'll tell this story on myself. And I honestly don't remember this, but I've been told that I did this. That I had been staying with my aunt. I was spending the weekend with my aunt. And when I went out there to stay with her, my mom and dad always gave me some money to have for different things, And so my Aunt Jane didn't, we were at a store somewhere, and she didn't have any money. And she said, I need to borrow $1. And so I asked her what she had for collateral. So I guess maybe I was meant to be a banker for all my life.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it.
But I tell you what
Collateral.
I tell you what I really do though, that that's just a little side story. But my first job was, as a lot of people back my age were, mowing yards and mowing lawns around the house, around the neighborhood. And I was getting, at the time, I was getting $4 a yard, and that was big money.
Yeah.
And so I think I had 3 yards, and one of the people always gave me a check. And they gave me a check for $4. Well, I had this little vault thing, money like a piggy bank, but it was a little vault. And that's where I kept my money and stuff. And I put those checks in there. Well, put those checks in there. I didn't cash them.
Right.
And that's my savings account.
Oh,
and so
all right.
I didn't know. And so one day, the lady that wrote me the check, she said, I was just looking at, I haven't seen where you've cashed any of those checks. Is something wrong? I said, oh, I was just kind of saving them. She said, well, you need to go ahead and cash those because I'll write this down and I balance my checkbook every day and you've got me out of balance.
Right.
And I said, oh, okay, I didn't know and understand that. So that was kind of the first time I realized that, okay, well, you got to balance your checkbook and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I would tell you this, which leads me to say that one thing that I do think, we talked about the millennials and the young folks coming out of high school being a little bit better equipped. There is a few differences. And one thing I think they're pitfall, and I would just tell everybody this. Debit cards are great. They're you flash them and chip readers and everything else, and they're very convenient and they're safer, especially during COVID. You don't want to handle bills and stuff like that. But got to keep a handle on that. And I know, because I'm guilty too, but if you're running close and you're running close, you need to write it down.
Yeah.
Because you either need to write it down or you need to go on your online banking every day and make sure that you're where you are.
That's right.
Don't wait a week. Don't wait 10 days because you might, oh my gosh, I did coffee, I did this, and all of a sudden you're overdrawn and nobody wants to pay a $25 overdraft fee. That's another one of those cycles you don't want to get into.
Right.
So that's a personal pitch.
It's so easy. It's just so easy to spend money, right? Especially at Venmo, Amazon.
Yeah, it's just we have made it extremely
really
easy to
spend
get money moved,
and really hard to save it.
Hard to save it and hard to keep up with where you spend it. So, but that is a discipline that if you'll get yourself into, I've always done it. We learned when I first got a checking account. My mother taught me, but she was a bookkeeper at the bank, but always balance my checkbook.
Right.
Well, nobody balances checkbooks much anymore because nobody writes checks anymore. But what you do need to do is you need to keep track.
Keep a track. Keep your eye on it.
Because that can get away from you.
Yes. Well, Sam, as we're talking to you just about the tenets of money and financial literacy, it makes me think of generosity, right? Because I think one of my earliest memories about finances was learning what you earn and then the 10% that you give and the 10% that you save, that tenet. And I think what's remarkable through this season of COVID-19 and United Way's community response, where anyone who needs to get help can call 211, can reach out to the United Way, to a myriad of partners in our community. But there's also ways for people to give help through the United Way to our neighbors right now. And we've got folks who are giving to the Restore Hope Fund to help during this financial season. We have folks who are volunteering through efforts all across our community and volunteering with 211, for example. And they're really advocating for financial literacy and policies and outreach efforts that open up those pathways to financial stability. I think about generosity, though, in the sense that we've had on many occasions folks who've received help through any of those pathways are the first to turn around and give and donate so that someone else can have it after them. Yeah. And I just, that cycle of generosity, I think, is just powerful, right? Generosity begets more generosity.
Yeah, there's no doubt that that giving feels better than receiving.
That's right.
And once you get a taste of it, yeah, I think you're really right.
Yeah.
And the very fact that you may not have been able to ever do that before, but got yourself in a position to do that, it's got to be one of the best feelings in the world. You know, a lot of us have been very fortunate during our lives, but many of us have not been and have been in situations where they just literally could not do it.
That's right.
And, you know, their charity was, you know, putting food on the table.
Oh, yeah.
But once you do it, it's really addicting.
Yeah.
It really is.
It is. It is. And so that's just a key. I think one of the amazing things about financial literacy is it brings more generosity. So
Yeah.
thanks for our time. Is there anything else on your mind or anything else that you want to be sure that our audience knows?
No, just know that if you're interested, if somebody's watching this and I don't want to go to an outreach, or I don't know who to call, or I don't know what to do. You know, if you've got availability to the internet or to online books, there are a lot of good reading material that is basic beginning of financial literacy.
Good.
And, you know, Dave Ramsey is a Tennessee person that's, you know, has taught a lot of people a lot of good things about money, but has got some really good basic information on the very beginning. I mean, the very beginning of starting your financial plan and starting these kind of things, all the way up to investing. All the way up the mirror. But there's also things for kids. I mean, there's Bernstein Bear books about financial literacy. So there is information out there, and you can go and do some research on your own, and get more confident if that's keeping you from making that outreach call or that call to somebody and asking maybe for help, or maybe going to a seminar that you just don't feel like you know anything and you don't want to be embarrassed. Then you can do a little bit of pre-work. It's out there.
That's great to know. Good. Thanks.
Sure.
Well, thanks for joining us. Episode 2 of Community Reimagined. We hope that you will find really powerful and concrete ways to give, advocate, and volunteer with the United Way. And thanks again, Sam, for being with us.
Glad to do it. Thank you.